The night Arya Vance realized her husband wanted her gone, she was standing in front of 200 people wearing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Dorian hadn't looked at her once all evening. Not when she entered the ballroom. Not when she greeted the guests. Not even when Lord Calloway's son took her hand and led her onto the dance floor while the entire room watched. She'd felt the weight of every stare except the one that mattered. And in that moment, spinning under chandeliers that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime, she understood something that made her stomach drop. She had become a ghost in her own life. This is the story of a woman who married into power and found herself erased by it. A story about what happens when survival means letting go of the one thing you thought you needed most. If you want to see how far this journey goes, stay until the end. And drop a comment with your city so I can see where this story reaches. The carriage that brought Arya to Blackidge Manor arrived 3 hours late, caked in ice and mud. She'd been traveling for 2 days. Her back ached. Her fingers were numb even inside her gloves. The small brazier at her feet had gone cold somewhere past the second toll station, and no one had bothered to replace the coals. When the driver finally opened the door, he didn't offer his hand. He just stepped aside and let the freezing air rush in like a living thing. "Welcome to Blackidge, ma'am," he muttered. Arya climbed out, her boots sinking into 3 inches of fresh snow. The manor loomed ahead, gray stone, sharp angles, windows like dark, unblinking eyes. No lights in most of them, no warmth bleeding through the glass. It looked less like a home and more like something left behind after a war. She pulled her cloak tighter. "Is the Duke?" "He's not here." She blinked. "What?" "Business in the capital. He'll return when he returns." The driver was already hauling her trunks off the back of the carriage. His tone made it clear he had no interest in elaborating. Arya stood there, snow gathering on her shoulders, staring at the house that was supposed to be hers now. 3 months ago, her father had signed the contract. 2 months ago, she'd met Dorian Hale exactly twice, once at the signing, once at the wedding. Both times, he'd been polite, distant, correct. She'd thought it was nerves or propriety. She'd told herself it would get better once they were alone. But he wasn't here, and no one had thought to tell her. "Ma'am?" The driver was standing by the steps now, waiting. She forced her legs to move. Inside, the manor was colder than outside. A housekeeper appeared, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with gray hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. She introduced herself as Mrs. Calloway. Not warm, not welcoming, just factual. "Your rooms are in the East Wing," Mrs. Calloway said, already walking. "Dinner's at 7, breakfast at 8. If you need anything, ring the bell. Someone will come. Eventually." Arya followed her through hallways that seemed to stretch forever. Dark wood, heavy curtains, portraits of people who all looked like they'd died angry. Everything smelled faintly of damp stone and old smoke. "How long has the Duke been gone?" Arya asked. 4 days. "And he'll be back when his business is finished." They stopped in front of a door. Mrs. Calloway pushed it open. "These are yours." The room was large, too large. A 4-poster bed dominated one side, draped in heavy navy fabric. A fireplace sat cold and black on the opposite wall. A single window looked out over nothing but snow and skeletal trees. "Where are the Duke's rooms?" Arya asked quietly. Mrs. Calloway's expression didn't shift. "West Wing." "Oh. Will that be all, ma'am?" Arya wanted to ask a dozen things. Why was her husband in a different wing? Why hadn't anyone lit the fire? Why did every person in this house look at her like she was an inconvenience? Instead, she just nodded. "Yes, thank you." Mrs. Calloway left without another word. Arya stood there, alone in a room that felt more like a cell than a bedroom, and tried very hard not to cry. Dorian returned 5 days later. Arya only knew because she heard the commotion from downstairs, boots on stone, voices in the entrance hall, the clatter of something heavy being set down. She'd been sitting in the library, trying to read the same page for the 4th time. Her hands were shaking. She didn't know why. She set the book down, smoothed her dress, told herself to breathe. By the time she reached the hall, he was already halfway up the stairs. "Dorian!" He stopped, turned. For a moment she just looked at him. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair, dark eyes, a face that could have been handsome if it wasn't so carefully blank. He was still wearing his travel coat, snow melting on the shoulders. "Arya." His voice was even, polite, empty. "I didn't realize you'd arrived. 5 days ago." "Ah." He glanced toward the upper floor. "I trust Mrs. Calloway made you comfortable." "She showed me to my room." "Good." Silence. She waited for something, an apology, an explanation. Anything that suggested he cared even slightly that he'd left his new wife alone in a strange house for nearly a week. But he just stood there, one hand on the banister, looking at her the way you'd look at a piece of furniture someone had delivered while you were out. "I should change," he said finally. "We'll speak at dinner." "Dorian?" But he was already moving again, taking the stairs 2 at a time, disappearing around the corner before she could finish. Arya stood there in the cold hallway, her breath misting in the air, and felt something crack inside her chest. Dinner was worse. The dining room could have seated 30. There were 2 place settings, one at the head of the table, one 12 feet away on the side. Arya sat in her spot, hands folded in her lap, while servants brought course after course in silence. Dorian ate without looking at her. She tried twice to start a conversation. "How was your trip?" "Fine." "What was the business?" "Logistics." He didn't ask about her journey, didn't ask how she was settling in, didn't ask anything. By the time dessert came, she'd stopped trying. When the meal ended, he stood, nodded once, good night, and left. Arya sat there alone, staring at the untouched cake on her plate, and realized with dawning horror that this was it. This was her life now. A contract, a title, a house full of people who didn't see her, and a husband who didn't want to. She made it back to her room before the tears came. The first month was the hardest. Arya tried. She really did. She dressed carefully every morning, hoping he'd notice. She learned his schedule, breakfast at 8, estate meetings in the afternoon, dinner at 7, and positioned herself to cross his path. She asked questions, offered help, suggested they ride together or walk the grounds, or do anything that involved more than 5 words of conversation. He was never rude, never cruel, just absent. "I'm occupied this afternoon. Perhaps another time." "That won't be necessary." It was like talking to a wall, a polite, well-dressed wall that looked through her instead of at her. The staff noticed. Of course they did. Arya could see it in the way the maids avoided eye contact, the way the cook stopped asking if she had preferences for meals, the way Mrs. Calloway's mouth thinned every time Arya appeared in a room Dorian had just left. One morning, she overheard 2 footmen talking in the hallway outside the library. Poor girl. Think she knew what she was signing up for? Does it matter? He's not going to change. Cold-hearted bastard. Oi, watch it. He pays your wages. Doesn't mean I have to like him. Arya pressed herself against the wall, heart hammering, and waited until they were gone before she moved. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. She'd been at Blackidge for 6 weeks. 6 weeks of silence, 6 weeks of meals where the only sound was cutlery on porcelain, 6 weeks of waking up alone, spending the day alone, and going to bed alone in a marriage that was supposed to fix everything. That morning, she'd received a letter from her father. "How are you finding married life? I trust the Duke is treating you well. Your mother and I are glad to know you're settled." Settled. She'd stared at that word until it stopped making sense. That afternoon, she went looking for Dorian. Found him in his study, door half open. He was standing by the window reading something. For once, he looked tired, human. There were lines around his eyes she hadn't noticed before. She knocked softly. He glanced up. "Yes? Can we talk?" "I'm in the middle of, please." Something in her voice must have registered because he set the papers down. "What is it?" She stepped inside. Closed the door. Her hands were shaking again. "I need to know if this is permanent." "If what is permanent?" "This." She gestured vaguely between them. "The distance, the silence, the way you look at me like I'm not even here." He didn't answer right away, just watched her with those dark, unreadable eyes. "I'm trying," she continued, voice cracking. "I'm trying so hard, Dorian. I moved my entire life to this place. I left my family, my home, everything I knew. I thought maybe we could..." This isn't a love match, Arya. The words hit like a slap. I know that, she whispered. I know it was arranged, but I thought we could at least be civil. I thought maybe, eventually, we could be. I don't know, partners, friends, something. He turned back to the window. I didn't ask for this either. Then why did you agree to it? Because it was necessary. For what? For things you wouldn't understand. Her hands curled into fists. Try me. Arya, no. Her voice came out sharper than she intended. You don't get to do that. You don't get to shut me out and then tell me I wouldn't understand. I'm not stupid. I'm not a child. I'm your wife. He didn't turn around. In name only. The silence that followed was suffocating. Arya felt something inside her go very, very still. In name only, she repeated slowly. Yes. So that's it. That's all this is ever going to be. He didn't answer. She waited. Gave him one last chance to take it back. To say something, anything, that suggested she mattered even a fraction as much as whatever ghosts he was protecting. But he just stood there, staring out at the snow, his back to her like a wall she'd never be able to climb. All right, she said quietly. He glanced over his shoulder. All right? All right. She turned toward the door. I won't bother you again. Arya. But she was already gone. That night, lying in her too large bed in her too cold room, Arya made a decision. She couldn't leave. The contract was ironclad. Her father had made sure of that. Divorce wasn't an option. Running away would destroy her family's reputation and leave her with nothing. So she'd stay. But she wouldn't disappear. She wouldn't keep begging for scraps of attention from a man who'd made it clear she was nothing more than a signature on a piece of paper. She wouldn't waste any more energy trying to be seen by someone determined to look away. If Dorian Hale wanted a wife in name only, fine. She'd give him exactly that, and she'd build a life that had nothing to do with him at all. The change didn't happen overnight. For the first week, Arya stayed in her room. She read, she wrote letters. She stared at the ceiling and tried to figure out who she was when she wasn't performing the role of hopeful, eager wife. Then, slowly, she started moving again. She explored the manor, really explored it, not just the paths between her room and the dining hall. She found a music room with a piano no one had touched in years, a conservatory full of dead plants, a library 3 times the size of the one she'd been using, packed with books in languages she didn't recognize. She started walking the grounds. Even in the cold, even in the snow, there was something soothing about moving through space that didn't care whether she was the Duchess of Blackidge or just a girl from a minor house trying not to drown. And then she started going into town. Blackidge Village was small, barely 1,000 people, but it was alive in a way the manor wasn't. There was a market on Thursdays, a church that held socials twice a month, a lending library run by a sharp-tongued woman named Mrs. Petra who didn't care about titles or bloodlines. You're the new Duchess, Mrs. Petra said the first time Arya walked in. I am. Heard you married a cold fish. Arya blinked. Then, despite everything, she laughed. That's one way to put it, Mrs. Petra snorted. Well, cold fish or not, you're welcome here. Just don't expect me to curtsy. I wouldn't dream of it. From there, things started to shift. Arya began attending the socials. At first, people were wary. She was the Duchess, after all, and Dorian's reputation preceded him. But Arya wasn't Dorian. She didn't stand in corners looking grim. She didn't make people feel small. She talked to them, asked about their lives, remembered their names. Mrs. Harrow, who ran the bakery, started saving her a cinnamon roll every Thursday. Thomas Vale, the blacksmith's son, told her about the irrigation problems in the East Fields. Clara Moss, a girl barely 16, shyly asked if Arya had ever been to the capital. And when Arya said yes, Clara's eyes lit up like lanterns. For the first time since arriving at Blackidge, Arya felt real. Oh, Dorian noticed. Of course he did. He didn't say anything at first, but Arya started catching him watching her, brief flickering glances across the dining room or through a window as she headed out to the carriage. Once, she came back from town to find him in the entrance hall, still in his riding coat, staring at the packages the footman was carrying inside. Busy day? He asked, Yes. She didn't stop walking. He frowned. Where were you? Out. Out where? She paused at the base of the stairs, looked back at him. Does it matter? He opened his mouth, closed it, said nothing. She went upstairs without waiting for an answer. 2 months after her decision, Arya hosted her first event. Not at the manor, Dorian would have refused, but Mrs. Petra mentioned that the church's charity fund was running low and Arya had an idea. She organized a benefit luncheon in the village square. Nothing extravagant, just tables, simple food, a chance for people to donate. She used a small portion of her personal allowance to cover costs and spent 2 weeks personally inviting every family in the area. It was a gamble. She had no idea if anyone would come. 140 people showed up. They ate, they talked, they donated more than Arya had dared hope. And when Mrs. Petra stood up to thank her, the applause was genuine. Not the polite, obligatory kind, but the kind that came from people who actually gave a damn. Arya stood there, surrounded by noise and warmth and life, and felt something she hadn't felt in months. She felt proud. That evening, she returned to the manor just before dinner. Dorian was already at the table when she arrived. He looked up as she entered, and for the first time his expression wasn't blank. It was complicated. "You were in the village," he said. "Yes." "All day?" "Yes." He set down his fork. "What were you doing?" "Hosting a luncheon." "A luncheon for charity. The church needed funds." He stared at her. "You organized a public event without consulting me." "I didn't think I needed to." She sat down, smoothing her napkin across her lap. "You've made it very clear that my life is my own business." His jaw tightened. "That's not what?" She looked at him directly. "Not what you meant, because it's certainly what you said." For a moment, he didn't respond, just looked at her like he was seeing someone he didn't recognize. "I heard it went well," he said finally. "It did. Mrs. Calloway said people were pleased." They were. Another silence, this one heavier. "You've been busy," he said quietly. "I have." "You're settling in." Arya almost laughed. "I'm surviving, Dorian. There's a difference." He flinched, barely, but she saw it. She didn't wait for him to recover, just picked up her fork and started eating, letting the silence stretch between them like the 12 feet of polished wood that had always been there. The invitations started arriving a month later. Lady Grayson wanted Arya to join her book club. Lord Calloway's wife asked if she'd help plan the autumn festival. The mayor's daughter invited her to tea. At first, Arya thought it was novelty. The new duchess, freshly interesting because she dared to exist outside the manor walls. But the invitations kept coming. And they weren't just polite gestures. People wanted her there. She started saying yes. Book club on Tuesdays. Planning meetings on Thursdays. Tea with various families on the weekends. She learned who was feuding with whom, which farms were struggling, who just had a baby, who was sick. She learned the rhythm of the town, its heartbeat, its small dramas and quiet joys. She also started hosting again, small dinners at the manor, carefully organized so Dorian could avoid them if he wanted. He always did. But people came anyway. And slowly, the cold, silent halls of Blackidge started to feel less like a prison and more like a stage, one where Arya was finally the lead instead of a prop. 6 months in, something shifted in her. She stopped checking to see if Dorian was watching, stopped hoping he'd join her for breakfast or ask about her day. She stopped performing for an audience of one who'd made it clear he wasn't interested in the show. Instead, she performed for herself. She started wearing colors again, deep reds, emerald greens, midnight blues. She stopped pulling her hair back into the severe styles Mrs. Calloway had suggested and let it fall loose, natural, the way she'd worn it before the wedding. She laughed louder, spoke more freely, stopped apologizing for taking up space. And people noticed. Not just in Blackidge, word spread. The Duchess who'd arrived like a ghost and emerged like a storm. Invitations started coming from neighboring estates, from families Arya had only heard of in passing. She accepted the ones that interested her, declined the ones that didn't. For the first time in her life, Aria Hale was making her own choices, and she was damn good at it. The first time Dorian saw her truly alive, it was at the Harringtons' winter ball. He hadn't planned to attend. Social events were tedious, full of people who wanted things from him, and he had no patience for the performance. But Lord Harrington had pressed, and it was easier to show his face for an hour than deal with the political fallout of refusal. He arrived late, stayed near the edges of the ballroom, and planned to leave early. Then he saw her. Aria was near the center of the room, surrounded by people. She was wearing a dress he'd never seen before, deep burgundy, cut in a way that was elegant but not ostentatious. Her hair was loose, falling in soft waves over her shoulders. She was laughing, really laughing, her whole face bright with it, at something Lord Calloway's son had said. Dorian stopped walking. He'd seen her before, obviously. Every day at dinner, sometimes in passing in the halls. But this was different. This was a woman who didn't need him, who didn't even notice he was there. The younger Calloway said something else, and Aria tilted her head back, still laughing. Another man joined the group, Marcus Wren, some minor lord's nephew. He said something low that made Aria smile, and she touched his arm lightly, familiarly, like they'd known each other for years. Dorian's chest tightened. Quite the transformation, isn't she? He turned. Lady Harrington was standing beside him, champagne in hand, eyes sharp. "I don't know what you mean," Dorian said evenly. "Your wife." Lady Harrington gestured with her glass. "When she first arrived, she looked like a frightened rabbit. Now look at her. Half the room can't take their eyes off her." Dorian didn't respond. "She's done well," Lady Harrington continued. "The charity work, the social organizing. People adore her. Quite the asset, really." "Yes," Dorian said tightly. "Quite." Lady Harrington smiled, small, knowing, though I suspect you already knew that. She drifted away before he could answer. Dorian stood there, watching his wife shine in a room full of people who valued her, and felt something cold and unfamiliar settle in his gut. It wasn't until Marcus Wren leaned in to whisper something in Aria's ear, until she smiled that soft, private smile, that Dorian realized what it was. Jealousy. He left the ball early. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't tell anyone he was going. Just walked out into the freezing night and climbed into his carriage, his mind a tangled mess of thoughts he didn't know how to organize. Aria hadn't looked for him, hadn't even glanced in his direction. She'd been fine without him, better than fine. And the worst part, the part that made his hands curl into fists, was that he had no right to be angry about it. He'd done this. He'd pushed her away, told her in a dozen different ways that she didn't matter, that this marriage was a formality, that she should expect nothing from him. And she'd listened. She'd stopped expecting, stopped waiting, stopped caring. By the time the carriage reached Blackidge, Dorian was staring out the window at nothing, a single thought circling his mind like a vulture. He'd lost something he never even tried to have, and he had no idea how to get it back. The morning after the Harrington ball, Aria woke to find a letter slipped under her door. She almost didn't open it. Letters at Blackidge were usually bills, invitations, or correspondence from her mother asking vague questions about her happiness that Aria had stopped answering honestly months ago. But this one was different. Thick paper, no seal, just her name written in handwriting she recognized immediately. She sat on the edge of her bed and unfolded it. "Aria, I believe we should discuss the arrangements for the spring season. There will be expectations. It would be prudent to present a united front. D." She read it twice, then a third time, waiting for something that wasn't there. An apology, an acknowledgement, anything that suggested he'd noticed she existed beyond her utility as a political prop. Nothing. She folded the letter carefully, walked to the fireplace, and dropped it into the cold ashes. Then she got dressed and went to breakfast. Dorian was already at the table when she arrived. He glanced up as she entered, and something flickered across his face. Expectation, maybe. Like he thought she'd mentioned the letter. She didn't. She sat down, accepted tea from the footman, and began eating without a word. "Did you receive my note?" Dorian asked finally. "I did." "And?" Aria took a sip of tea. "And what?" His jaw tightened. I think we should discuss the spring season. Yes, I gathered that from the letter. She set her cup down with a soft clink. What exactly did you want to discuss? There will be events, dinners, balls. People will expect us to attend together. Will they? Yes. And you think that after 6 months of making it abundantly clear you want nothing to do with me, we should suddenly pretend to be a happily married couple for the benefit of strangers? He stiffened. I'm not asking you to pretend anything. I'm asking you to fulfill your obligations. My obligations. Arya set down her fork, her hands perfectly steady even though something hot and sharp was rising in her chest. Tell me, Dorian, what obligations have you fulfilled? Because from where I'm sitting, you've done the absolute minimum required to avoid scandal, and nothing more. That's not fair, isn't it? She leaned back in her chair, meeting his eyes directly. You married me for political advantage, fine. I understood that from the beginning. But you didn't just keep me at arm's length, you erased me. You made me feel like a ghost in my own home. And now that I've stopped waiting for you to notice I exist, now that I've built something for myself, you want me to play the dutiful wife because it's convenient? I never asked you to You didn't ask me to do anything. That was the problem. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Dorian's knuckles were white where they gripped his knife. I have my reasons for the way I've conducted myself. I'm sure you do. You don't understand? Then help me understand. Arya's voice didn't rise, but it hardened. Explain it to me. Tell me why you treat me like I'm an obligation you resent, instead of a person you chose to bind your life to. Tell me why the idea of spending an evening in my company seems to physically pain you. He looked away. Of course he did. Arya stood, smoothing her skirt. When you're ready to have an actual conversation, not issue orders or expect compliance, you know where to find me. Moi, Smith, beau ce souci. She walked out before he could respond, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might crack a rib. Behind her, she heard the sharp crack of a fist hitting wood. She didn't look back. For 3 days, they didn't speak. Arya threw herself into her work. There was a new project, a plan to improve the village school, and she spent hours in meetings with Mrs. Petra and the mayor trying to figure out funding. Dorian stayed locked in his study or disappeared on long rides across the estate, returning after dark covered in mud and looking like he'd been fighting something that only existed in his head. Mrs. Calloway watched them both with an expression that managed to be disapproving and pitying at the same time. On the 4th day, Arya received an invitation from the Duchess of Ravenhill, a woman notorious for hosting the most influential salon in the region. An invitation from her was currency, social power in paper form. Arya accepted immediately. She didn't tell Dorian. In fact, the salon was everything Arya had heard and more. 40 people crammed into an opulent drawing room talking over each other about politics, art, philosophy, scandal. The Duchess herself, a silver-haired woman in her 60s with eyes like a hawk, greeted Arya at the door. "So you're Blackidge's ghost bride," she said without preamble. Arya blinked. "I'm sorry? That's what they're calling you. The woman who married the coldest man in 3 counties and somehow didn't freeze to death." The Duchess smiled, sharp, amused. "I like you already. Come, let me introduce you to people worth knowing." The afternoon blurred into a whirlwind of names, faces, and conversations that actually mattered. These weren't polite drawing room chats about weather and fabric. These were debates. Real ones, where people disagreed loudly and no one took offense. Arya found herself pulled into a discussion about land reform with Lord Ashford, a progressive thinker who thought the old estate system was choking economic growth. You can't just dismantle centuries of tradition, someone argued. Why not? Arya heard herself say. If the tradition isn't working, what's the point of preserving it? The room went quiet. Lord Ashford grinned. Exactly. From there, the conversation exploded. Arya held her ground, argued her points, conceded when she was wrong, and pushed back when she wasn't. By the time the salon ended, her cheeks hurt from smiling and her mind was buzzing with ideas she couldn't wait to write down. The Duchess caught her on the way out. "You'll come back," she said. It wasn't a question. "I'd like that." Good. You're wasted on Blackidge, you know. That husband of yours is a fool. Arya laughed, surprised, genuine. You won't get an argument from me. Didn't think I would. The Duchess patted her arm. Keep doing what you're doing, girl. The world needs more women who refuse to disappear. Arya walked out into the cold evening air feeling lighter than she had in months. She didn't notice the figure watching from across the street until she was halfway to her carriage. Dorian. He was standing in the shadows near a lamppost, his coat pulled tight against the wind, his expression unreadable. Their eyes met. Arya's stomach dropped, not from fear, but from the sudden, unwelcome rush of something. Anger, maybe. Or exhaustion. Or the sharp, bitter edge of wondering why now, after everything, he was suddenly everywhere she looked. She didn't wave, didn't acknowledge him, just climbed into her carriage and left him standing there in the dark. He was waiting in the entrance hall when she got home. We need to talk, he said the moment she stepped inside. No, we don't. Arya. I'm tired, Dorian. It's been a long day. She handed her cloak to the waiting footman without looking at her husband. If you have something to say, put it in a letter. You're good at those. She started toward the stairs. I saw you, he said. She stopped. Saw me where? At the Duchess of Ravenhill's salon. Were you following me? I was in the area. That's not an answer. He exhaled sharply. I wanted to see where you were going. Why? Because you've been leaving the house almost every day for the past 2 weeks, and He stopped himself, jaw working like the words were getting stuck. You what? Arya turned to face him fully. You were curious? Concerned? Jealous? I don't know. The honesty of it startled her. He looked, she didn't know how to describe it, rattled, like a man who'd just realized he'd lost something valuable and had no idea where he'd put it down. You can't do this, Arya said quietly. Do what? Ignore me for 6 months and then suddenly care where I am and what I'm doing. It doesn't work like that. I never ignored you. You didn't see me. There's a difference. He flinched. Good. I'm going to bed, Arya said. Good night. Arya, wait. But she was already climbing the stairs, and this time he didn't try to stop her. The next morning, there were flowers in her room. Not a bouquet. An entire garden's worth. Roses, lilies, orchids, things that didn't even grow this time of year, which meant he'd paid someone a small fortune to import them. There was a note tucked among the stems. I'm sorry. That was it. 2 words. Arya stared at them for a long time. Then she called for Mrs. Calloway. Yes, ma'am? Please have these distributed to the village, the families who need them most. Mrs. Calloway's eyebrows rose. All of them? All of them. And if the Duke asks, tell him I said thank you. Arya's smile was thin. But I'm not interested in gestures. I'm interested in change. By midday, every flower was gone. Vassin. Dorian found out, of course. He didn't say anything at dinner that night, but Arya could feel the tension radiating off him like heat from a forge. His hands were tight around his fork. His jaw kept flexing like he was biting back words that wanted to escape. Halfway through the meal, he set down his utensils. You gave them away, he said. I did. Why? Because people in the village need kindness more than I need expensive apologies. His eyes flashed. It wasn't meant to be. What? A gesture? That's exactly what it was, Dorian. A grand, expensive gesture designed to make you feel better about treating me like furniture for half a year. That's not fair. You keep saying that, but you never explain what would be fair. You never tell me what you actually want from me. I want... He stopped, swallowed hard. I want things to be different. Different how? I don't know. Arya laughed, sharp, humorless. You don't know. Of course you don't. She stood, pushing her chair back. Where are you going? I have a meeting in town tomorrow morning. I need to prepare. Another meeting. Yes. With who? Does it matter? His hand slammed down on the table. Not loud, just enough to make the plates rattle. Yes, it matters. Arya went very still. Dorian was breathing hard, his eyes wild in a way she'd never seen before. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked unraveled. Why? She asked softly. Why does it matter now? Because He broke off, his hands curling into fists. Because every time you leave this house, I don't know if you're coming back. The admission hung between them like smoke. Arya's chest tightened. I've never threatened to leave. You don't have to. You've already left. You just haven't physically gone yet. Whose fault is that? He didn't answer. Arya felt something crack inside her. Not collapse, but fracture. A clean break. You did this, Dorian. You pushed me away so thoroughly that I had to build an entire life outside of you just to survive. And now that I'm thriving, now that I don't need you, you suddenly care? That's not love. That's not even respect. That's just ego. It's not. Then what is it? Her voice rose. Tell me. Explain to me what's changed. I saw you, he said roughly, at the Harrington ball, with those men, laughing, smiling. You looked happy. And I realized I'd never seen you look like that before, because I've never been happy here. The words came out harder than she intended, but she didn't take them back. Dorian looked like she'd struck him. I'm not staying, Arya continued, her voice shaking now. I'm staying in this marriage. I have to. But I'm not staying in this limbo where I wait for you to decide I'm worth your time. I'm done waiting. I'm done hoping. I'm done trying to earn something you should have given freely from the start. Arya, I'm going to bed. She walked out. This time, he didn't call after her. The days that followed were strange. Dorian started appearing, not intrusively, not in the overbearing, controlling way Arya had feared, but he was there, in the library when she was reading, in the hallway when she returned from town, at breakfast, at dinner, always watching, never speaking unless she spoke first. It was unnerving. What are you doing? She asked one afternoon when she found him sitting in the music room, a room he'd never once entered before. Listening, he said. She'd been playing piano, badly. She wasn't particularly talented, but it soothed her. To what? You. Her fingers stilled on the keys. Why? Because I never did before. The simplicity of it made her throat tight. You can't just decide to pay attention now and expect everything to be fixed, she said quietly. I know. Then what do you want? He looked at her, really looked, his dark eyes tired and raw. I want to know you. You had 6 months to know me. I was afraid. The admission shocked them both. Arya turned on the bench to face him fully. Afraid of what? He didn't answer right away. Just sat there, his hands clasped between his knees, looking like a man at the edge of a cliff trying to decide whether to jump. Afraid that if I let you in, he said finally, you'd see what everyone else sees, that I'm... He stopped, shook his head. It doesn't matter. It does. No, it doesn't. Because I used my fear as an excuse to hurt you, and that's unforgivable. Arya's hands curled in her lap. You can't just apologize and expect me to... I'm not expecting anything. His voice was rough. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I've destroyed any chance we had before we even started, but I need you to know that I see it now. I see what I did, and I'm sorry. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Arya stood. Sorry isn't enough. I know. If you want me to even consider trusting you, you're going to have to do more than show up and look sad. I will. You'll fail, she said bluntly. You'll mess up. You'll revert to old habits. And when you do, I won't give you another chance. I understand. She studied him, this man she'd married, this stranger she'd lived with for 6 months, this broken, guarded person who'd finally cracked enough to let her see inside. She didn't believe him, but some traitorous part of her wanted to. I have a meeting in town tomorrow, she said, with the mayor and Mrs. Petra. We're finalizing plans for the school renovation. If you want to be involved, you can come. His eyes widened. You'd let me. I'm not letting you do anything. I'm giving you an option. What you do with it is up to you. She left him sitting there, his expression caught between hope and something that looked like terror. Kulkum, he showed up. The next morning, as Arya was climbing into the carriage, Dorian appeared in the courtyard dressed for travel. I'd like to come, he said. If the offer still stands. Arya studied him. He looked nervous, actually genuinely nervous, like a man walking into battle unarmed. Get in, she said. The ride to town was quiet. Arya spent most of it reviewing her notes. Dorian stared out the window, his jaw tight. When they arrived, Mrs. Petra was waiting outside the town hall, arms crossed. So you brought the cold fish, she said without preamble. Dorian blinked. Excuse me? You're excused. Mrs. Petra's smile was sharp. Now, are you here to help or get in the way? Help. I'm here to help. Good. We need someone to deal with the budget committee. They've been stonewalling the funding for weeks. Dorian straightened. I can handle that. Can you? Yes. Mrs. Petra looked at Arya. Arya shrugged. Fine, Mrs. Petra said. But if you waste my time, I'm kicking you out, Duchess's husband or not. Ibu? The meeting was chaos. The budget committee, 3 older men who clearly thought they were the most important people in the room, kept talking over Arya every time she tried to explain the funding breakdown. She stayed calm, but Arya could feel her frustration building. Then Dorian spoke. Gentlemen, his voice cut through the noise like a blade. The Duchess is speaking. I suggest you listen. The room went silent. One of the men, Baxter, a sour-faced landowner, bristled. With all due respect, Your Grace, no. Baxter blinked. I'm sorry? You don't get to talk yet. You've interrupted her 3 times in the last 10 minutes. Now sit, down, and listen. Arya stared at him. Dorian didn't look at her, just kept his eyes locked on Baxter until the older man, face red, sank back into his chair. Continue, Dorian said to Arya. She did. And this time, no one interrupted. Upset. By the time the meeting ended, they'd secured the funding, finalized the construction timeline, and gotten commitments from 6 local families to donate labor. Mrs. Petra looked grudgingly impressed. Not bad, cold fish. Dorian's mouth twitched. Thank you, I think. On the ride home, Arya finally spoke. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. Why? He looked at her. Because you're brilliant, and watching them dismiss you was unbearable. Something in her chest twisted. She looked away, out the window, trying to steady herself. Don't do this if you're going to change your mind. I won't. You don't know that. You're right, I don't. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped. But I'm going to try. And if I fail, you can throw me out. You can tell the entire county what a bastard I am. I won't fight you. Why now? Her voice cracked. Why after everything? Are you trying now? Because I finally understand what I lost. You didn't lose me. You never had me. I know. His eyes were dark, raw, and that's the worst part. Arya didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Just sat there in the silence, feeling the impossible weight of 6 months of loneliness pressing against the fragile, terrifying possibility that maybe, things could be different. They reached Blackidge as the sun was setting. Dorian helped her out of the carriage, his hand warm, steady, and for the first time, she didn't pull away. Same time next week? She asked. He looked startled. You want me to come again? If you're serious about this, you'll show up. If you're not, you won't. She met his eyes. It's that simple. He nodded slowly. I'll be there. She walked inside without another word, but that night, lying in bed, Arya couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd looked at her in the carriage, like she was something precious he'd just realized he'd been holding wrong. But that night, lying in bed, Arya couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd looked at her in the carriage, like she was something precious he'd just realized he'd been holding wrong. She hated that it mattered. Hated that after everything, the loneliness, the rejection, the months of building herself back up from nothing, a single look from him could unsettle her like this. It felt like a betrayal of the person she'd fought so hard to become. She rolled onto her side, staring at the dark outline of the window. Outside, snow was falling again. It always seemed to be snowing at Blackidge. The problem was that she didn't trust him, couldn't trust him. Trust wasn't something you handed back to someone who'd crushed it just because they suddenly decided they wanted it. Trust had to be earned, rebuilt, proven over time. And Dorian had given her one meeting, one afternoon where he'd acted like a partner instead of a stranger. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But the traitorous part of her that had felt something when he defended her in that room, the part that had noticed the way his hand steadied her when she stepped out of the carriage, that part whispered that maybe it was a start. She told that part to shut up and eventually fell into restless sleep. But he showed up to the next meeting, and the one after that, and the one after that. It became a pattern. Every week, Arya would announce her plans, a town council session, a visit to coordinate with the builders, a fundraising event, and Dorian would be waiting by the carriage, dressed and ready. He didn't try to take over, didn't speak unless spoken to, just participated, asked questions, listened when people talked, took notes for crying out loud, like he was a secretary instead of a duke. It was strange, unsettling, and Arya didn't know what to do with it. "He's trying," Mrs. Petra said one afternoon after Dorian had spent an hour helping organize supply donations. "I know. You don't sound happy about it." Arya set down the ledger she'd been reviewing. "I don't know if I am." Mrs. Petra snorted. "You're scared." "I'm not." "You are. You're terrified that if you let him in, he'll go back to being the cold bastard he was before. And you're right to be scared. Men don't change overnight." She leaned back in her chair. "But they don't usually show up every week for a month either, so maybe give him a little credit." "A little credit doesn't erase 6 months of damage." "No, but it's more than most women get." Arya looked at her. Mrs. Petra's expression was hard, but not unkind. "I'm not saying forgive him," the older woman continued. "I'm saying don't punish him for trying just because you're angry about the past. That's how you end up bitter instead of happy." Arya didn't respond, but the words stuck with her all the way home. The shift happened slowly, so slowly that Arya didn't notice until it had already changed everything. Dorian started staying for dinner, not just sitting at the opposite end of the table in silence, but actually talking, asking about her day, telling her about his. They argued about land policy, debated tax structures, disagreed about which families to prioritize for housing assistance. It felt normal, dangerous. Then one evening, she found him in the library. She'd gone looking for a book, something about agricultural reform that Lord Ashford had recommended. And there he was, sitting in one of the chairs by the fire, reading. He looked up when she entered. "Sorry, I can leave if—" "No, it's fine." She moved toward the shelves, scanning titles. "I'm just looking for something." "What?" "A book on crop rotation. Ashford said it would help with the spring planting proposals." Dorian stood, crossed to a different shelf, and pulled down a volume. "This one?" She blinked. "Yes, how did you—" "I read it last week, thought it might be useful." He handed it to her. "It's dense, but the chapter on soil regeneration is worth the effort." Arya stared at him. "You've been reading agricultural theory?" "You've been working on agricultural projects. I thought I should understand what you're talking about." He shrugged, looking almost embarrassed. "I've been behind on a lot of things." Something in her chest tightened. She took the book. Their fingers brushed. Neither of them moved. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You're welcome." They stood there in the firelight, close enough that she could see the faint scar above his left eyebrow, the tiredness around his eyes, the way he was looking at her like he was trying to memorize her face. "Arya, I should go." She stepped back. "Early meeting tomorrow." "Right, of course." She left before he could say anything else, before she could do something stupid like ask him to stay, before the careful walls she'd built could crack any further. The breaking point came 3 weeks later at the Ashfords' spring gala. It was one of the biggest events of the season. 200 guests, orchestra, dancing, The kind of night where reputations were made and alliances shifted. Arya had been looking forward to it for weeks. She'd had a new dress made, deep emerald silk that made her feel powerful and elegant and wholly herself. Dorian had asked if they could attend together. She'd said yes. It was a mistake. They arrived together, walked in together, and the entire room noticed. Whispers rippled through the crowd. The Duke and Duchess of Blackidge actually together for once, looking almost like a real couple. Arya hated it, hated the speculation, the knowing looks, the way people watched them like they were a spectacle. "Smile," Dorian murmured as they moved through the receiving line. "People are staring. Let them. Arya, I'm here. I'm playing the part. Don't push it." His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. The evening started well enough. Arya talked with Lady Grayson about the book club, danced with Lord Ashford, and debated economic theory while spinning across the floor. Dorian stayed close, but not suffocating, always in her peripheral vision, but never intruding. Then Marcus Wren showed up. Arya had met Marcus at the Duchess of Ravenhill's salon. He was young, maybe 30, charming, intelligent, and relentlessly cheerful in a way that made him impossible to dislike. He'd written her twice since they'd met, asking for her thoughts on various social projects, friendly letters, nothing inappropriate, but when he appeared at her elbow during a break in the dancing, grinning like they were old friends, something in the air shifted. "Duchess," Marcus said, bowing. "You look stunning." "Marcus, I didn't know you'd be here." "Last-minute invitation. I've been in the capital for weeks. Just got back yesterday." He glanced around. "Is the Duke nearby?" Dorian's voice cut in. Arya turned. Dorian was standing 3 feet away, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes hard. Marcus, oblivious, smiled. "Your Grace, good to see you." Dorian nodded. Once, barely. An awkward silence settled. "Well," Marcus said brightly, "I was hoping to steal the Duchess for a dance, if that's acceptable." "She's not," Dorian started. "I'd love to," Arya interrupted. Dorian's eyes snapped to hers. She met his gaze evenly. She wasn't doing this to hurt him. She was doing it because Marcus was her friend, and she wasn't going to let Dorian's sudden possessiveness dictate who she spent time with. "Shall we?" Marcus offered his arm. Arya took it. Behind them, Dorian didn't move, just stood there, radiating tension, as they walked onto the dance floor. The dance was fine, pleasant, even. Marcus was a good partner, light on his feet, easy to talk to. "You've been busy," he said as they moved through a turn. "I heard about the school project. Impressive work." "Thank you." "And the Duke's been helping?" "He has." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "That's, unexpected. The rumors made him sound like a recluse. He's trying." The words came out more defensive than she intended. Marcus's expression softened. "Good. You deserve someone who tries." She didn't know what to say to that. The music swelled. They spun through another turn. And when Arya glanced toward the edge of the floor, she saw Dorian. He was watching them. Not subtly, not politely, just standing there, staring, his hands clenched at his sides like he was physically restraining himself from crossing the room. Their eyes met. Even across the distance, even through the crowd, the look on his face made her stomach flip. It was raw, desperate, furious, jealous. The dance ended. Marcus bowed, thanked her, and disappeared into the crowd to find a drink. Arya didn't move. Dorian did. He cut through the crowd like a knife, ignoring the people who tried to stop him, his eyes locked on her. "We're leaving," he said when he reached her. "Excuse me?" "Now." "Dorian, please." His voice was low, tight. "I'm asking, please. We need to leave." There was something in his tone, something frayed and barely controlled, that made her nod. "All right." They left without saying goodbye to anyone. The carriage ride back to Blackidge was silent. Arya sat on one side, staring out the window. Dorian sat on the other, his breathing harsh in the confined space. She could feel the tension radiating off him like heat, could see his hands gripping his knees so hard his knuckles had gone white. "Are you going to explain yourself?" she asked finally. No. Dorian, I can't. His voice cracked. Not right now. You dragged me out of a gala because I danced with someone. You owe me an explanation. I know. Then give me one. He turned to look at her. His eyes were wild, dark and burning, and full of something that looked dangerously close to panic. I can't watch you with him, he said roughly. With who? Marcus? With anyone. I can't. He broke off, running a hand through his hair. I know I have no right. I know I did this. I pushed you away and you built a life without me, and that's exactly what I deserved. But watching you laugh with him, watching you look at him the way you used to look at me before I destroyed it, I never looked at you like that. You never gave me the chance. I know! The word came out like a shout. He flinched at his own volume, lowered his voice. I know. I know I ruined everything. I know you don't owe me anything. But I can't keep pretending I'm fine with this. Fine with what? With losing you. Arya's breath caught. You haven't lost me. We're married. I'm not going anywhere. Yes, you are. He looked at her like she was killing him. Maybe not physically, but you're slipping away. Every day you get further from me. And I deserve it. I know I deserve it. But it's destroying me. The carriage hit a bump. They both swayed but didn't break eye contact. You can't do this, Arya said, her voice shaking. You can't ignore me for months, then suddenly decide you care and expect me to what? Fall into your arms? Forget everything? I don't expect anything. Then what do you want? A chance. He leaned forward, his eyes desperate. Just a chance, a real one, to prove I can be the husband you deserve from the beginning. You had that chance. You wasted it. I know. Then why should I give you another? Because... He stopped, swallowed hard. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. Because I love you. The world stopped. Arya stared at him, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. What did you say? I love you. He said it louder this time, clearer, like he'd been holding it back for so long that it physically hurt to let it out. I've loved you since the moment you told me you were done waiting. Since the moment you stopped needing me and I realized I needed you. I love you, and I've been too much of a coward to say it because saying it means admitting how badly I failed you. Arya couldn't breathe. You don't mean that. I do. You don't even know me. I'm trying to, every day. That's all I've been doing, trying to know you, trying to understand you, trying to figure out how someone I treated so terribly could still be kind, still be brilliant, still be... His voice broke. You're everything I'm not. And I don't deserve you, but I love you anyway. Tears burned behind her eyes. You can't just say that and expect it to fix everything. I know. Love isn't enough. I know. Then why are you telling me this? Because I'm out of time. He looked at her with something that looked like desperation. Because you're slipping away and I'm terrified that if I don't say it now, I'll never get another chance. The carriage lurched to a stop. They'd reached Blackidge. Neither of them moved. I need time, Arya whispered. I'll give you all the time you need. I need space. I'll stay away. No. She shook her head. I don't want you to stay away. I need to think. I need to figure out if I can even trust this. If I can trust you. I understand. She reached for the door handle. Arya. She looked back. I meant it, he said quietly. Every word. She didn't respond, just climbed out of the carriage and walked into the manor without looking back. She didn't see him for 3 days. Not at meals, not in the hallways, not anywhere. At first she thought he was giving her space like she'd asked. Then Mrs. Calloway mentioned, in that carefully neutral tone she used when delivering bad news, that the Duke had taken ill and was confined to his rooms. Arya told herself she didn't care, told herself it was probably just a cold, nothing serious, and he had servants to take care of him. Told herself she had too much to do to worry about a man who'd spent 6 months not worrying about her. She lasted until the 4th day. That morning she woke up to sounds of chaos downstairs. Footsteps running, voices raised, doors slamming. She threw on a robe and rushed into the hallway just as Mrs. Calloway came hurrying up the stairs. "What's happening?" Mrs. Calloway's face was pale. "It's the Duke. The fever's gotten worse. We've sent for the doctor." But Arya didn't wait to hear the rest. She ran. His rooms were in the west wing, the part of the manor she'd never entered. She burst through the door without knocking and stopped dead. The room was a mess. Blankets on the floor, a chair knocked over, and in the massive four-poster bed, Dorian, looking smaller and more fragile than she'd ever seen him, thrashing in sheets soaked with sweat. A servant was trying to hold him down. "Your Grace, please, you need to—" Dorian's eyes were open but unfocused. He was mumbling something Arya couldn't make out, his voice hoarse and broken. "How long has he been like this?" Arya demanded. The servant jumped. "Ma'am, you shouldn't—" "How long?" "Since last night. The fever spiked around midnight. We've tried cold compresses, but—" Arya crossed the room in 3 strides. "Get me fresh water and clean cloths, now." The servant hesitated. "Now." He scrambled out. Arya sat on the edge of the bed, reaching for Dorian's burning forehead. He jerked away from her touch, still caught in whatever fever dream had him trapped. "Dorian," she said firmly. "It's me. It's Arya. You're safe." His eyes found hers, barely. "Arya, I'm here. You left." His voice was raw. "You left, and I couldn't. I didn't leave. I'm right here." He grabbed her wrist. His grip was weak but desperate. "Don't go, please. I can't. If you go—" "I'm not going anywhere." She covered his hand with hers. "I promise. Just breathe. You're all right." "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." "Shh. We can talk about that later. Right now you need to rest." "I ruined everything. Dorian, I loved her, and I ruined it." His eyes were glassy, fever bright. "Just like before. Just like—" He broke off, gasping. Arya's heart stopped. "Just like what?" "Dorian, what are you talking about?" But he was gone again, sinking back into delirium, his hand going slack in hers. The servant returned with water and cloths. Arya worked quickly, cooling his forehead, his neck, his wrists. The fever wouldn't break. Every time she thought it was going down, it spiked again. The doctor arrived an hour later. He examined Dorian, prescribed medicine, and told Arya grimly that they'd have to wait it out. "Will he—" She couldn't finish the question. "He's strong," the doctor said, "but the next 24 hours are critical." Arya nodded numbly. She didn't leave his side. Night fell. The fever raged. Dorian drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid, mostly not. During one of the lucid moments, his eyes cleared enough to focus on her. "You're still here," he whispered. "I told you I wasn't leaving." "Why?" "Because—" She paused, wiping his forehead with a damp cloth. "Because despite everything, I don't want you to die." A weak smile. Low bar. "It's all I've got right now." He closed his eyes. "Fair enough. Dorian." She waited until he looked at her again. "Earlier, you said something about ruining things before. What did you mean?" His expression shuddered. "I don't remember." "Yes, you do." "Arya, if you want me to trust you, you need to be honest with me about everything." He was quiet for so long she thought he'd fallen asleep again. Then, "Her name was Catherine." Arya went still. "We were engaged," Dorian continued, his voice flat. 5 years ago, before I inherited the title, before all of this." "What happened?" "I was young, stupid. I thought love was enough." He laughed, bitter, hollow. "We were going to get married, start a life. I had plans, dreams, all the things people have before reality breaks them. Dorian, she was sleeping with my best friend." He said it without emotion, like he was reading from a script. "For 6 months, the whole time we were engaged. I found out 3 days before the wedding." Arya's breath caught. "I confronted her. She didn't deny it. Said she never loved me. Said I was convenient. A decent match, nothing more. He stared at the ceiling. So I called off the wedding, cut them both out of my life, swore I'd never let anyone close enough to do that again. And then you married me. And then my father died, and the estate was drowning in debt, and your father offered a solution, and I... He stopped, swallowed hard. I took it. I married you knowing I'd keep you at a distance, knowing I'd treat you like a contract instead of a person, because it was safer, because I was too broken to risk anything real. Tears slid down Arya's cheeks before she could stop them. I'm sorry, Dorian whispered. I'm so sorry, Arya. You deserved better. You deserved everything, and I gave you nothing because I was too afraid of being hurt again. You hurt me instead. I know. You made me feel invisible. I know. You almost destroyed me. I know. His voice cracked. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to fix it, if you'll let me. Arya wiped her eyes. I don't know if I can. I understand. Do you? Because this, what you just told me, it explains things. But it doesn't excuse them. Your pain doesn't justify mine. You're right. And I'm not Catherine. I never was. I would never... I know that now. He reached for her hand. I know. And I hate that it took me so long to see it. I hate that I wasted months treating you like the enemy when you were the only good thing in my life. The fever was still burning through him. His hand was too hot, his breathing too shallow. Rest, Arya said gently. We'll talk more when you're better. Promise me something. What? Promise me you'll think about it. About us. About whether we could... He couldn't finish. I promise. He nodded once, then his eyes drifted shut. Arya sat there holding his hand as the night deepened around them, her heart a tangled mess of anger and grief, and something that felt dangerously like hope. What? The fever broke just before dawn. One moment, Dorian was burning. The next, his skin cooled, his breathing evened out, and he fell into what looked like real sleep instead of the fitful, agonized half-consciousness he'd been trapped in. Arya slumped in her chair, exhausted. The doctor returned, examined Dorian, and pronounced him out of danger. You should rest, Your Grace, he told Arya. You've been awake all night. I'm fine. You're not. You're dead on your feet. He packed his bag. He'll sleep for hours. Go. Get some rest. I'll have someone sit with him. Arya looked at Dorian, peaceful now, the tension finally gone from his face, and nodded. She stood, her legs shaky, and made it halfway to the door before his voice stopped her. Arya. She turned. His eyes were open, barely, but clear. Thank you, he whispered. She didn't trust herself to speak, just nodded and left. She made it to her room, closed the door, and collapsed onto her bed. And for the first time since arriving at Blackidge, Arya cried, deep, wrenching sobs that tore through her like a storm, for everything she'd lost, everything she'd survived, and the impossible, terrifying choice now lying in front of her. Because somewhere in the last 12 hours, something had shifted. She'd seen the man beneath the armor, seen his wounds, seen his fear, and now she had to decide if seeing was enough. She woke 6 hours later to sunlight streaming through her window and the terrible, hollow feeling that came from crying yourself to sleep. Her eyes were swollen. Her head ached. Every muscle in her body felt like it had been wrung out and left to dry. She forced herself up anyway. There was a note slipped under her door. Mrs. Calloway's handwriting, neat and precise. The Duke is awake and asking for you. Arya stared at the words until they blurred. She should go. She knew she should. But the thought of walking into that room, of facing him after everything he'd said, after everything she'd felt, her hands were shaking. She set the note down, washed her face, changed into a simple day dress, and made herself walk to the west wing. His door was open. He was sitting up in bed, propped against pillows, looking exhausted but alive. The fever flush was gone. His eyes were clear. He saw her in the doorway and went very still. You came, he said quietly. You asked. I wasn't sure you would. She stepped inside but didn't come closer. How are you feeling? Like I got trampled by a horse, but better. He paused. The doctor said you stayed all night. Someone had to. It didn't have to be you. I know. Silence stretched between them, not hostile, but heavy, full of words neither of them knew how to say. Do you remember what you told me? Arya asked finally. Last night during the fever. His jaw tightened. Most of it. All of it? Yes. Catherine. He flinched at the name. Yes. You should have told me months ago. I know. Not because it excuses anything, but because I deserve to understand why. She stopped, her throat tight. Why you looked at me like I was a threat instead of a person. You weren't a threat. You were terrifying. She blinked. What? You were everything she wasn't. Kind, genuine, real. He looked down at his hands. And I was so afraid that if I let myself care about you, you'd turn into her. That I'd wake up one day and realize it was all performance. That you'd break me the way she did. So you broke me first. Yes. The word came out like a confession. And I hate myself for it. Arya crossed her arms, holding herself together. I don't know what you want me to say. I don't want you to say anything. I just want you to know the truth. All of it. No more walls, no more hiding. He met her eyes. I love you. I'm in love with you. And I don't know how to fix what I've done, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying if you'll let me. Her chest ached. Love isn't enough, Dorian. I know. I need more than words. I need proof. I need time. I need... She broke off, frustrated. I need to know that a year from now, you won't wake up and decide this was all a mistake. That you won't go back to being that cold, distant stranger who made me feel like I was disappearing. I won't. You don't know that. You're right. I don't. He leaned forward slightly, wincing at the movement. But I'm willing to spend every single day proving it to you, for however long it takes. Arya wanted to believe him. Wanted it so badly it scared her. I need space, Jan, she said. I need time to think without you watching me. Without this, she gestured between them, clouding everything. How much time? I don't know. He nodded slowly. I'll give you whatever you need. Good. She turned to leave. Arya. She stopped but didn't look back. I meant what I said, every word. She walked out without responding. The next 2 weeks were the longest of her life. Arya threw herself into work with a ferocity that bordered on reckless. The school project was entering its final phase. Construction had started, and there were 1,000 decisions to make every day. She spent hours on site, arguing with builders, checking budgets, making sure every nail and board was accounted for. It was easier than thinking about Dorian. He kept his word, stayed away. She saw him occasionally, across the dining room, at meals they no longer shared, in the hallway in passing, once from a distance when she was leaving for town and he was returning from a ride. He always looked like he wanted to say something. He never did. Mrs. Petra noticed. Of course she did. You're running yourself into the ground, she said one afternoon when Arya showed up to a planning meeting looking like she hadn't slept in days. I'm fine. You're not. You look like death warmed over. Thank you. Very reassuring. Mrs. Petra set down her pen. What happened? Nothing. Don't lie to me. You've been acting like a woman possessed for 2 weeks, and the Duke looks like someone kicked his dog. So what happened? Arya's hands curled into fists. He told me he loves me. Mrs. Petra's eyebrows shot up. And I don't know if I believe him. Why not? Because he spent 6 months treating me like I didn't exist. Because he's only saying it now that I don't need him anymore. Because, her voice cracked, because I'm terrified that if I let myself believe it, he'll take it back. Mrs. Petra studied her for a long moment. You love him. I don't. You do. You wouldn't be this torn up about it if you didn't. Arya looked away. It doesn't matter. Of course it matters. No, it doesn't. Because love isn't enough. I need trust. I need partnership. I need someone who sees me as an equal, not a possession he suddenly decided he wants to keep. And you think he can't be that person? I think he hasn't been that person. And I don't know if people really change. Mrs. Petra leaned back in her chair. They don't, not overnight. But they can grow if they're willing to do the work. She paused. The question isn't whether he's changed, it's whether you're willing to give him the chance to prove it. Arya didn't have an answer to that. The turning point came on a rainy Thursday. Arya was at the construction site, knee-deep in mud, trying to fix a drainage problem that threatened to flood the foundation. She was soaked, exhausted, and about 3 seconds away from screaming when a familiar voice spoke behind her. "You're doing it wrong." She spun around. Dorian was standing 10 feet away, dressed for riding, his coat already darkening with rain. "Excuse me?" "The drainage, you're angling it wrong. It'll pool instead of running off." He stepped closer, pointing. "You need to slope it toward the east field. Otherwise, you'll have standing water every time it rains." Arya stared at him. "What are you doing here? I saw you leave. Thought you might need help." "I don't." The angle of that trench says otherwise. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him to leave. But when she looked at the trench, then at the plans in her mud-splattered hands, she realized he was right. "Fine," she said tightly. "What do you suggest?" He didn't gloat, just rolled up his sleeves and waded into the mud beside her. For the next 2 hours they worked side by side, digging, measuring, adjusting. He didn't try to take over, didn't issue orders, just worked, offering suggestions when she asked, and staying quiet when she didn't. By the time they finished, they were both covered in mud and soaked to the bone. "Better?" Dorian asked. Arya examined the new slope. "Yes, thank you." "You're welcome." They stood there in the rain, water streaming down their faces, and Arya felt something shift inside her chest. "Why did you come?" she asked quietly. "Because you needed help. You could have sent someone, one of the groundskeepers, anyone." "I could have." He looked at her. "But I wanted to be here. I wanted to help you, not because I'm trying to win you back, though I am, but because this matters to you, and what matters to you matters to me." Her throat tightened. "I know you don't trust me yet," he continued. "I know I haven't earned it, but I'm not going anywhere, whether you forgive me or not. Whether we ever—" He stopped. "I'm here, for whatever you need, even if all you need is someone to dig trenches in the mud." Arya didn't know what to say, so she just nodded. They walked back to the manor in silence, and when they parted ways at the entrance, him to the west wing, her to the east, Arya realized she was smiling. After that, things changed. Not dramatically, not like a switch flipping, but slowly, incrementally, like ice melting under spring sun. Dorian started showing up to things, not intrusively, not demanding attention, just there, at town meetings, at planning sessions, at the site when there was heavy lifting to be done. He worked hard, harder than Arya had ever seen him work at anything. He carried lumber, argued with suppliers, charmed donations out of reluctant donors. He learned people's names, asked about their families, listened when they talked, and he didn't do it for her, or at least not just for her. He did it because the work mattered, because the community mattered, because somewhere along the way, he'd stopped being the distant, untouchable Duke of Blackidge and started being someone who actually gave a damn about the people under his care. People noticed. "Your husband's changed," Mrs. Harrow said one afternoon, handing Arya a cinnamon roll still warm from the oven. "Never thought I'd say it, but he's almost pleasant." Arya nearly choked on her tea. "Pleasant? Well, less terrifying at least." Mrs. Harrow grinned. "What did you do to him?" "Nothing. I ignored him." Clearly that was the right approach. Thomas Vale, the blacksmith's son, cornered her after a council meeting. "The Duke came by the forge yesterday," he said. "He did?" "Asked about the irrigation issue, offered to fund repairs." Thomas scratched his head. "I thought he'd forgotten we existed, to be honest. But he knew details, knew which fields were affected, even suggested a solution I hadn't thought of." Arya blinked. "What did you say?" "I said yes, obviously." Thomas paused. "He's not what I expected." "No," Arya said quietly. "He's not." Yeah. 3 weeks after the Muddy Trench incident, the school was finished. It was small, just 3 rooms, but it was solid, well built. The walls were straight, the roof didn't leak, and the windows let in enough light to read by. Arya stood in the main classroom, running her hand along the smooth wood of the desks they'd had made locally, and felt something swell in her chest. Pride, accomplishment, joy. She'd done this. Not alone, never alone, but she'd been the driving force, the one who'd refused to give up when the funding fell through, when the builders quit, when every obstacle that could appear did appear. And now it was real. The opening ceremony was scheduled for the following Saturday. The entire village would be there. It was meant to be a celebration, a moment of triumph. But when Saturday arrived, Arya woke up to chaos. Mrs. Calloway burst into her room without knocking, her face pale. "What's wrong?" "The mayor's withdrawn his support. He's refusing to attend the ceremony, says he won't endorse a project that undermines traditional education." Arya's stomach dropped. What? Lord Baxter got to him, convinced him the school would create problems, encourage ideas above people's station, disrupt the social order, the usual nonsense. Mrs. Calloway's mouth was a thin line. Without the mayor's endorsement, half the council won't come. And without them, the whole thing falls apart. Yes. Arya sat down hard on the edge of her bed. This was it. The moment where everything she'd worked for could collapse. Where all the effort, all the struggle, all the careful alliance building could shatter because one bitter old man decided to play politics. She should have seen it coming, should have anticipated that Baxter, who'd fought her at every turn, would make one last play to undermine her. But she'd been too focused on Dorian, too distracted by her own internal war to pay attention to the external one. "What do we do?" Mrs. Calloway asked. Arya looked at her. "We? You think I'm going to let Baxter win? After everything you've done?" The older woman's expression was fierce. "Tell me what to do, and I'll do it." Before Arya could answer, there was a knock at the door. Dorian stood in the hallway, already dressed, his expression grim. "I heard," he said. "News travels fast." "Mrs. Petra sent word. She thought I should know." He stepped into the room, ignoring Mrs. Calloway's raised eyebrows. "What's the plan?" "I don't have one yet." "Then we make one. Now." Arya studied him. He wasn't taking over, wasn't issuing orders, just offering to help. "All right," she said, "but we do this my way, of course." "Mrs. Calloway, get word to Mrs. Petra and everyone on the planning committee. Emergency meeting in 1 hour. Dorian, what do you need? Can you get me a list of every family who's donated to this project? Everyone who's contributed time, money, materials? I need to know exactly who has a stake in this. I'll have it in 30 minutes. Good, go." He went. Mrs. Calloway was staring at her. "What?" Arya asked. "Nothing, just, you're terrifying when you're angry." "Good, because Baxter hasn't seen angry yet." The meeting convened in the library. 15 people crammed into the space. Mrs. Petra, the planning committee members, several key donors, and Dorian. Arya stood at the front of the room, the donor list in her hands, and got straight to the point. "Baxter's trying to kill the school by turning this into a political issue. He's convinced the mayor that supporting us means endorsing social upheaval, which is, of course, ridiculous. But it's working. Without the mayor's presence at the ceremony, we lose legitimacy. And without legitimacy, the school becomes a target. So what do we do?" someone asked. "We go around him." Mrs. Petra smiled slowly. "I'm listening." Arya set down the list. "Baxter's strategy relies on making this seem like my project. The Duchess's vanity endeavor. Something imposed from above that doesn't reflect the community's will. So we take that away from him. We make it clear that this school belongs to everyone who built it. Not me, not the Duke, everyone. How? Every person on this list, every family who contributed, gets a personal invitation. Not from me, from the community. We go door to door. We remind people what they've already invested. We tell them that Baxter's trying to erase their work, their sacrifice, their children's future. And we ask them to show up. Not for me. For themselves. Thomas Vale leaned forward. You think that'll be enough? I think if we get 200 people at that ceremony, Baxter and the mayor become irrelevant. The story stops being the Duchess's controversial project and starts being the village's collective achievement. And that's a story they can't fight. Silence. Then Mrs. Petra laughed, sharp and delighted. You devious, brilliant woman. Is that a yes? That's a hell yes. The planning started immediately. They divided up the donor list, assigned routes, drafted talking points. Dorian stayed quiet through most of it, just listening. But when Mrs. Petra asked who'd handle the more difficult families, the ones on the fence, he spoke up. I'll do it, he said. Everyone turned to look at him. With all due respect, Your Grace, Thomas said carefully, you're not exactly known for your charm. I'm aware, but I'm also the Duke, and some of these families will respond to title and authority even if they don't respond to reason. He looked at Arya. If you'll allow it. She considered it was a risk. Dorian's reputation was still that of the cold, distant aristocrat. Having him knock on doors could backfire spectacularly, but it could also show people that he'd changed, that he wasn't just tolerating her work, he was invested in it. All right, she said, but you go with Thomas. He knows these families. He can smooth things over if you accidentally terrify someone. Thomas grinned. I'll keep him on a leash. Dorian's mouth twitched. Appreciated. But they spent the next 2 days canvassing. Arya took the eastern part of the village. Mrs. Petra took the west. Thomas and Dorian handled the outskirts. It was exhausting. Some families were eager. They'd already planned to attend and were furious that Baxter was trying to undermine the project. Others were hesitant, worried about political fallout, afraid of being associated with something controversial. Arya talked until her voice was hoarse, reminded people what this meant, what their children would gain, what they'd already sacrificed to make it real. Slowly, the commitments started piling up. By Friday evening, they had 150 confirmed attendees. Not bad, Mrs. Petra said, reviewing the list, but we need more. We'll get them, Arya said. She was exhausted. Her feet ached, her head pounded, but she wasn't giving up. Tomorrow, we'll hit the families who haven't responded yet. Tomorrow's the ceremony. Then we'll do it in the morning. Mrs. Petra shook her head, smiling. You're insane. Probably. Dorian appeared in the doorway. He looked as tired as Arya felt. His coat was dusty, his hair disheveled, shadows under his eyes. How many did you get? Arya asked. 43. She blinked. 43? Thomas is very persuasive. I mostly just stood there looking ducal. He paused. Though Mrs. Marsh did say I was surprisingly tolerable. Despite everything, Arya laughed. High praise. I thought so. Thomas appeared behind him, grinning. He was good. Didn't threaten anyone, didn't condescend, just talked to people like they mattered. Because they do, Dorian said quietly. The room went silent. Arya looked at him, really looked. At the exhaustion in his face, the dirt on his coat, the way he was leaning against the doorframe like he'd been on his feet all day, which he had been. For this, for her project, for a community that had never given him anything but fear and distance. Thank you, she said. He met her eyes. You're welcome. Ikin. Saturday morning dawned clear and cold. Arya woke early, dressed carefully, and made her way to the school. People were already gathering, families with children, elderly couples, young workers, more than she'd expected, more than she'd dared hope. By the time the ceremony was supposed to start, there were 230 people crowded into the schoolyard. The mayor didn't come. Neither did Lord Baxter, but almost everyone else did. Arya stood at the front, looking at the sea of faces, people she'd come to know over the past months, people who'd helped build this place, people who believed in what it represented and felt something break open in her chest. Mrs. Petra nudged her. You should say something. I don't know what to say. Yes, you do. Arya took a breath and stepped forward. Thank you for coming, she started. Her voice shook. She steadied it. I know some of you were told this was a bad idea, that building this school would cause problems, that it wasn't worth the effort, but you came anyway. You built it anyway, and now it's real. Not because of me, because of you. Because you believed your children deserved better, because you were willing to work for it. She paused, looking at the building behind her. Small, simple, perfect. This school belongs to you, to this community, and no one, no matter their title or position, can take that away. The applause started slowly, then built into something thunderous. Arya stepped back, her eyes burning with tears she refused to let fall. Dorian was standing off to the side, watching her. When their eyes met, he smiled, small, genuine, proud. And for the first time in months, Arya smiled back. The celebration lasted hours. Food appeared, people had brought bread, cheese, pastries, things they'd made themselves. Children ran through the schoolyard. Adults talked and laughed and planned what came next. Arya moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations, answering questions, feeling lighter than she had in years. At some point, she found herself standing next to Dorian. "You did well," he said quietly. "We did well." "No, this was you. I just helped." She turned to look at him. "You did more than help. You showed up. You worked. You talked to people who've spent years being afraid of you and convinced them you actually care. That's not nothing." "I do care. I know." The words surprised her, but they were true. "I see that now." He looked at her, that same raw, hopeful expression he'd worn in the carriage weeks ago. "Does that mean—" "It means I'm starting to believe you. It means I think maybe, possibly, we could figure this out." She took a breath. "But it also means I need you to understand something." "What?" "I'm never going to be the wife who disappears into the background, who sits quietly and lets you make all the decisions, who waits for permission to exist. I don't want you to be. You say that now, I mean it." His voice was firm. "I fell in love with the woman who rebuilt herself without me. Who created all of this?" He gestured at the crowd, the school, the life she'd built. "Because she refused to disappear. I don't want you to change. I want to be the kind of husband who deserves you." Arya's throat tightened. "You're going to have to keep proving that, over and over, for a long time." "I know. And I'm going to mess up too. I'm going to be angry and difficult and impossible sometimes." "Good." He smiled slightly. "I'd be suspicious if you weren't." She laughed, surprised, genuine. They stood there in the sunlight, surrounded by people, and Arya felt something she hadn't felt since arriving at Blackidge. Peace. Not resolution. Not answers. Just peace. "I'm willing to try," she said quietly. "If you are." "I am." "Then let's see what happens." He held out his hand. She took it. And across the schoolyard, Mrs. Petra saw them standing together and smiled. And across the schoolyard, Mrs. Petra saw them standing together and smiled. The celebration wound down as the sun began to set, families drifting home with promises to return on Monday when classes would officially begin. Arya stayed until the last person left, helping pack up leftover food and straighten the chairs someone had dragged outside. Her hands were sticky from cake and her feet ached, but she felt good, solid, like something fundamental had finally clicked into place. Dorian stayed too. Didn't hover, didn't try to manage things, just worked alongside her, carrying tables back inside, sweeping the floor when she pointed to the broom. "You don't have to do this," she said at one point. "I know. The servants could—" "I want to." He set down a chair, meeting her eyes. "This matters to you, so it matters to me." She believed him. That was the startling part. After everything, after all the months of mistrust, she actually believed he meant it. They rode back to Blackidge in comfortable silence, the kind that didn't need filling. When they arrived, Dorian helped her down from the carriage, and they stood there in the courtyard, neither quite ready to separate and return to their opposite wings. "Thank you," Arya said, "for today, for the last few weeks, for—" She gestured vaguely. "Everything." "You don't need to thank me." "Yes, I do. You didn't have to show up. You could have stayed distant, protected yourself. Kept doing what you'd always done, but you didn't. You chose to try. And that, her voice caught, that means something. He stepped closer, not crowding, just closing the distance between them. Can I ask you something? Of course. What happens now? She knew what he was really asking, where they stood, what she was willing to risk, whether the fragile bridge they'd started building could hold weight. I don't know, she said honestly. I think we figure it out as we go. I think we keep showing up, keep trying, and maybe eventually, she paused, maybe eventually it stops feeling so hard. And if it doesn't, then we deal with that too. He nodded slowly. That's fair. Dorian, yes? I'm still scared. Of what? Of letting you in and getting hurt. Of trusting this and having it fall apart. Of, she laughed shakily, of being happy and then losing it. He reached for her hand, slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. I'm scared too, he said quietly. Terrified, actually, but I'd rather be terrified with you than safe and alone. Something in her chest cracked open. She squeezed his hand. One day at a time? One day at a time. They walked into the manor together, and for the first time, Arya didn't immediately retreat to the east wing. Instead, she paused at the base of the stairs. Do you want to have dinner together? The question came out awkward, uncertain. Not in the dining room. Maybe the library? Something less formal. His smile was worth every second of vulnerability it took to ask. I'd like that. Go. Dinner in the library became a pattern. Not every night. Arya still needed space, still had evenings where she preferred solitude, but often enough that it stopped feeling strange. They talked about the school, about estate business, about books they'd read and ideas they'd had. They argued about politics and laughed about Mrs. Petra's latest cutting remark. They learned each other in small increments, filling in the gaps that should have been filled months ago. It wasn't perfect. They stumbled, had moments of tension when old habits tried to resurface. Dorian closing off when a topic got too personal, Arya retreating when she felt crowded. But they caught themselves faster now, apologized quicker, kept trying. 2 weeks after the school opening, Arya woke to find a note slipped under her door. The music room piano has been tuned. I thought you might like to know. D. She stood there holding the paper, something warm and complicated spreading through her chest. He'd noticed that she played badly and didn't care, that the instrument was out of tune, that it mattered to her anyway. She found him in his study that afternoon. Thank you, she said from the doorway. He looked up from the papers he'd been reviewing. For what? The piano. Oh, you're welcome. He set down his pen. I know you're not particularly good at it. Excuse me? But you seemed to enjoy it anyway, and the tuning was atrocious. She tried to be offended, but ended up laughing instead. I'm terrible at it. Monumentally. And you still had it fixed. Of course I did. You love it. He said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Arya leaned against the door frame, studying him. You're different. I'm trying to be. No, you are. Different. She came into the room perching on the edge of his desk. The man I married wouldn't have noticed the piano, wouldn't have cared, wouldn't have done something kind just because it might make me happy. The man you married was an idiot. He was protecting himself by hurting you, which makes him an idiot. Dorian met her eyes. I wasted months, Arya, months where I could have known you, could have built something real instead of this hollow contract. And I can't get that time back. All I can do is make sure I don't waste any more. She reached out, touching his hand where it rested on the desk. We're figuring it out. Are we? I think so, slowly, messily. But yeah, I think so. He turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. I want to be better. For you. For us. You are better. You're showing up. That's more than... She stopped. More than what? More than I thought you were capable of. When I first came here. She squeezed his hand. You keep surprising me. Good surprises? Mostly. He smiled, that small, genuine smile that made him look younger, less guarded. I'll take mostly. The real test came 3 weeks later. Arya received a letter from her mother, thick envelope, elaborate seal, the kind that meant formal business. She opened it at breakfast, scanning the contents, and felt her stomach drop. "What's wrong?" Dorian asked. They were eating together now, had been for days, and he'd gotten better at reading her expressions. "My parents are coming here next week for a visit." She set down the letter, her hands not quite steady. "My mother wants to see how I'm settling in," which was code for check if the marriage her father had arranged was functioning, make sure Arya hadn't embarrassed the family, assess whether the alliance was worth maintaining. Dorian's expression hardened. "What do you want to do?" "I don't know. I can't exactly tell them not to come, but—" She broke off, frustrated. "They're going to ask questions. About us. About whether we're—" She gestured vaguely. "Whether this is working. What do you want to tell them? The truth?" "Which is?" Arya looked at him, really looked, at the man who'd been showing up every day for weeks, who'd dug trenches in the mud and charmed donations out of stubborn villagers, who'd noticed her terrible piano playing and fixed it anyway. "That it's complicated," she said finally. "That we're trying. That it's not what they probably imagined, but it's ours." "Will that be enough for them?" "I don't know. Probably not." She picked up her tea, staring into the cup. "My mother will want grand gestures, public displays of affection, evidence that the investment paid off. And we don't have that. No, we have something better, but I'm not sure she'll understand." Dorian was quiet for a long moment, then, "What if we showed her?" "Showed her what?" "What we've built, the school, the town projects, the work you've done." He leaned forward. "Your mother wants evidence that this marriage was worthwhile. So we give her evidence, not of romance, of partnership, of what you've accomplished, of who you've become." Arya blinked. "You think that'll work?" "I think your mother will expect to find a timid girl playing house. And instead, she'll find a woman who's reshaped an entire community, who has respect and influence and power." He paused. "That's worth more than any love match. You're suggesting we lean into the business angle. I'm suggesting we show her the truth, that this marriage gave you freedom, resources, a platform, and you used them to do something extraordinary. It was smart, ruthlessly practical, and completely unlike the romantic reconciliation her mother probably expected." "All right," Arya said. "Let's do it." The week passed in a blur of preparation. Arya organized a tour of the village, arranged meetings with key community members, made sure everything looked polished but lived in. Dorian helped, coordinating with the estate staff, ensuring the manor was presentable, drafting talking points for the difficult conversations Arya knew were coming. They worked well together. That was the surprising part. Somewhere along the way, they developed a rhythm. Arya handling the social maneuvering, Dorian managing the logistics, both of them checking in and adjusting as needed. "You're nervous," Dorian observed the night before her parents were due to arrive. They were in the library. Arya was pacing. He was watching her from his chair, a book forgotten in his lap. "I'm terrified." "Why?" "Because—" She stopped, trying to organize the mess of feelings churning in her stomach. "Because they sent me here expecting one thing, and I've become something completely different, and I don't know if they'll approve." "Do you need them to?" "I don't want to, but—" She laughed bitterly. "Yes, part of me does. The part that's still their daughter and still wants them to be proud." Dorian set down his book and stood. "They should be proud. You've done more in 8 months than most people do in a lifetime. That's not what they'll care about. Then they're fools." She stopped pacing, looking at him. "You really believe that?" "Of course I do. I've watched you, Arya. I've seen what you're capable of. Your parents would be lucky to have you as a daughter, just like I'm lucky to—" He stopped. "Lucky to what?" "Have you as a wife, even if I don't deserve you." Her throat tightened. "Dorian." I know we're still figuring this out. I know I haven't earned the right to call this a real marriage. But I'm grateful, every day, that you're here, that you're giving me a chance to be better. Arya crossed the room and took his hands. We're figuring it out together. You're not the only one who has to earn anything. You haven't done anything wrong. I've been angry, stubborn. I've pushed you away when you were trying. You had every right. Maybe. But that doesn't mean I was always fair. She squeezed his hands. We both made mistakes. We're both learning. That's the point. He pulled her closer, slowly, giving her time to resist. She didn't. Just let him wrap his arms around her and hold her, her cheek pressed against his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. We'll get through this, he murmured into her hair. Whatever happens with your parents, we'll handle it. She believed him. Her parents arrived on a cold, bright Tuesday morning. Arya's mother, Lady Margot Vance, stepped out of the carriage looking exactly as Arya remembered, elegant, composed, intimidating. Her father followed, quieter, but no less imposing. Darling! Her mother embraced her briefly. You look well. Thank you, Mother. And this must be your husband. Lady Margot turned to Dorian with assessing eyes. Dorian bowed. Lady Vance, Lord Vance, welcome to Blackidge. Thank you for having us. Her father's tone was cordial, but careful. They went inside. Mrs. Calloway had prepared rooms in the guest wing, and after a brief rest, the four of them convened for lunch. It was excruciating. Lady Margot asked polite questions about the estate, the staff, the social calendar. Each question was a probe, testing for cracks. Arya answered carefully, aware that every word was being weighed and measured. And how have you been finding married life? Her mother asked over dessert. Arya set down her fork. Different than I expected. How so? I thought I'd be more contained, but instead I've had opportunities I never would have had at home. Opportunities? Her mother's eyebrow arched. What sort of opportunities? To work, to build things, to make a difference in the community. I see. Lady Margot's tone was neutral, but Arya could read the disapproval underneath. And you, Your Grace? You approve of your wife engaging in such activities? Dorian met her eyes without flinching. I don't just approve, I support them. Arya has done more for this estate and its people in 8 months than I did in 5 years. She's extraordinary. Arya's breath caught. Her mother blinked, clearly not expecting such a direct answer. That's quite the endorsement. It's the truth. Lady Margot looked between them, her expression calculating. I'm glad you think so highly of her, though I must say I expected to find you both closer. The letters we received suggested a more traditional arrangement. Mother, I'm simply observing, darling. You're seated quite far apart. You barely look at each other. One might think we're two people learning how to be partners, Arya interrupted, her voice firm. Which we are. It's not a fairy tale, Mother. It's real life. Complicated and messy and imperfect. I see. But it's ours. And we're making it work. In our own way. Her mother studied her for a long moment. You've changed. Yes. You're more assertive. Yes. I'm not sure that's entirely appropriate for what? A duchess? A wife? A woman? Arya set down her napkin. I've built a school, Mother. I've organized community projects that have improved dozens of lives. I've earned the respect of people who initially saw me as nothing more than an outsider. And I did all of it while navigating a marriage that started as little more than a business contract. So yes, I've changed, and I'm not apologizing for it. Silence. Her father cleared his throat. Perhaps we should discuss this later, after we've all had time to rest. An excellent idea, Dorian agreed smoothly. Arya, perhaps you could show your parents the grounds. The gardens are quite beautiful this time of year. It was a polite exit. Arya took it gratefully. The tour of the village the next day went better. Arya showed them the school, introduced them to Mrs. Petra and the planning committee, explained the funding structure and the community involvement. Her mother remained skeptical, but her father seemed genuinely impressed. "You organized all of this?" he asked, looking at the classroom full of children. "With help. A lot of help. But yes." "That's remarkable, Arya." She felt something warm bloom in her chest. "Thank you, Father." That evening, her mother requested a private conversation. They met in Arya's sitting room, neutral territory, no servants hovering. Lady Margot settled into a chair with the air of someone preparing for battle. "I'll be direct," she started. "Your father and I are concerned." "About what?" "About this marriage. About whether it's truly functioning as it should." Arya crossed her arms. "Define as it should." "Don't be clever, Arya. You know what I mean. We arranged this match to secure your future, to give you stability and status. But from what I've observed, you and the Duke live almost separate lives. You barely touch, barely speak except when necessary. This isn't a marriage. It's exactly what you arranged," Arya said quietly. "You wanted a business alliance. You got one. The Duke needed to secure his estate. You needed to elevate our family's position. The contract was fulfilled. What happens beyond that isn't your concern." Her mother's eyes flashed. "You're my daughter. Your happiness is absolutely my concern." "Is it? Because I don't remember you asking if I was happy when you signed the contract. I don't remember you giving me a choice. We did what was best for you." "No, you did what was best for the family, which is fine. I understand politics, but don't pretend this was about my happiness. It was about advantage." Lady Margot stood, pacing to the window. "You're angry." "I was angry. I'm not anymore. Or at least, I'm working on not being angry." Arya took a breath. "Mother, I'm not the girl you sent here 8 months ago. I've changed. I've grown. And yes, it was hard. Harder than it should have been. But I survived. More than survived. I thrived. And that's worth something." "And your husband? Has he changed too?" Arya thought about Dorian in the mud, arguing with builders. Dorian defending her in meetings. Dorian holding her in the library, promising to keep trying. "Yes," she said, "he has." "Do you love him?" The question caught her off guard. She paused. "I don't know. Maybe. I think I could. But love isn't the point right now. The point is partnership, trust, building something real instead of pretending everything's perfect." Her mother turned to face her. "That's very practical." "You raised me to be practical." "I suppose I did." Lady Margot studied her daughter with an expression Arya couldn't quite read. "You're stronger than I expected. Is that a compliment?" "It's an observation, and yes, perhaps a compliment." She came back to her chair, sitting down with a sigh. "I wanted security for you, Arya. I wanted to know you'd be taken care of. But I see now that you don't need taking care of. You're perfectly capable of taking care of yourself." Arya blinked, surprised. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. I'm still not entirely pleased about the school situation. It's very modern. The world is changing, Mother." "So I'm learning." Lady Margot reached over, patting Arya's hand. "Your father is proud of you. I wanted you to know that. He won't say it. You know how he is, but he is." Something in Arya's chest loosened. "And you?" Her mother smiled, small, reluctant, but genuine. "I'm still deciding. Ask me again in a year when I've had time to adjust to this new version of you." It wasn't a ringing endorsement, but it was something. Her parents left 2 days later. The goodbye was cordial, warmer than the greeting, which Arya counted as a victory. Her father pulled her aside before climbing into the carriage. "Keep doing what you're doing," he said quietly. "Don't let anyone, including your mother, convince you to be smaller than you are." "I won't." "Good." He kissed her forehead. "We're proud of you, Arya, both of us, even if she's too stubborn to say it properly." Arya watched them leave, Dorian standing beside her in the courtyard. "That went better than expected," he observed. "Did it?" "Your mother didn't actively try to dissolve the marriage. I'd call that a win." She laughed despite herself. "Low bar." "We excel at low bars." They walked back inside together, and Arya felt lighter than she had in weeks. The visit hadn't been perfect, but it had been honest, real, and she'd survived it without losing herself. That evening, they had dinner in the library as usual, but something felt different, settled. "Can I ask you something?" Arya said. "Always." "Earlier, during lunch with my parents, you said I was extraordinary. You are. Did you mean it?" Dorian set down his fork, giving her his full attention. "Every word. Arya, I've watched you transform this place. Transform yourself. Transform me. You're the strongest person I've ever met. And yes, you're extraordinary. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it." She felt heat rise to her cheeks. I'm just doing what needed to be done. That's what makes it extraordinary. You see what needs fixing, and you fix it. No hesitation, no waiting for permission." He paused. "I spent years being afraid, hiding, protecting myself from getting hurt again. And then you showed up and refused to disappear, and it forced me to realize that protection isn't the same as living. Dorian, I love you." He said it simply, directly. "I know I've said it before, but I need you to know I mean it. Not the idea of you, not what you represent, you, the woman who plays piano terribly and argues with builders and makes an entire village love her just by showing up. I love you, and I'll keep loving you whether you love me back or not." Arya's breath caught. She stood, crossing the small space between them, and did something she'd been afraid to do for months. She kissed him. It was soft, tentative, a question more than a statement. But when he kissed her back, gentle, careful, like she was something precious, she felt the last of her walls crumble. When they pulled apart, she was crying. "Hey," he murmured, wiping her tears with his thumb. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. Everything. I don't know." She laughed shakily. "I think I love you too, and that's terrifying." "Why?" "Because what if we mess it up? What if we will mess it up?" He cupped her face in his hands. "We're human. We'll fight. We'll have bad days. We'll hurt each other without meaning to. But we'll also keep trying, keep showing up, keep choosing each other. And that's enough. Is it? It has to be, because perfect doesn't exist, but this," he gestured between them, "this is real. And real is better." She kissed him again, deeper this time, and felt something fundamental shift into place. They didn't solve everything that night. There were still conversations to have, wounds to heal, patterns to break. But they'd crossed a threshold, moved from trying to actually succeeding, from hoping to believing, and that was enough. 3 years later, Arya stood in the same schoolyard where everything had changed. It was bigger now. They'd added 2 more classrooms, a library, a small workshop for vocational training. The original 3 rooms were filled with children ages 6 to 12. The new wing housed older students learning trades, carpentry, metalwork, accounting. It was more than she'd dreamed. Dorian was beside her, holding their daughter, 8 months old, with his dark eyes and her stubborn chin. The baby was chewing on her fist and staring at everything with intense concentration. "She's going to be trouble," Dorian said. "Good. You sound pleased about that." "I am. The world needs more trouble." Arya adjusted the baby's bonnet. "Especially the kind that asks questions and doesn't settle for easy answers." "Like her mother." "Exactly like her mother." Mrs. Petra approached, grinning. "Is this the little terror I've been hearing about?" "She's not a terror. She's spirited. That's what parents say about terrors." Mrs. Petra held out her arms. "May I?" Arya handed over the baby, who immediately grabbed Mrs. Petra's nose. "Strong grip," Mrs. Petra observed. "She'll make a good leader." That's the plan. They watched the children playing in the yard, some from families Arya had known since the beginning, others new arrivals who'd moved to Blackidge specifically for the school. It had become a draw, a reason to settle here instead of leaving for larger towns. The village had grown, thrived, and Arya had been at the center of it all. "You did this," Dorian said quietly. "We did this." "No, you started it. I just helped." She leaned against him, letting him wrap his free arm around her waist. I couldn't have done it alone. You could have, but I'm glad you didn't have to. They stood there as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and Arya thought about the girl who'd arrived at Blackidge 3 years ago. Lost. Invisible. Desperate for someone to see her. That girl was gone. In her place was a woman who'd built something from nothing, who'd survived isolation and come out stronger, who'd learned that being chosen wasn't as important as choosing yourself, and who'd found love, real love, complicated and imperfect and earned in the process. Ready to go home? Dorian asked. Home. Blackidge. The place that had once felt like a prison and now felt like exactly where she belonged. Yes, Arya said. Let's go home. They walked back to the carriage together, their daughter babbling nonsense between them, and Arya felt something she'd spent so long searching for finally settle into place. Peace, purpose, partnership. A life that was wholly, completely hers. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.